Thank you very much, James, and good afternoon. I'm not too sure about the goosebumps after watching that. I was nearly in tears. That's how good that video was. So congratulations to the visit agency. That's fantastic. But I want to take this opportunity to give an update on a lot of the hard work we've been doing at Orsted on the Mervanin offshore wind farm project. We have been running our public consultation throughout this summer and working with a huge number of stakeholders across the island over the past few years. And really to give a chance to put into perspective, given all of the things that we've heard over the last few days about the island's priorities and strategic priorities for the future, where we see at Orsted the opportunity for the island's first offshore wind farm to sit with that. For just a brief introduction, and I do want to make as much time as possible for questions at the end, so I will canter through some of this, but this gives a snapshot of Orsted's footprint across the UK and Ireland. You can see, of course, right in the middle, right at the heart, are the proposals for Mervanin and the Isle of Man. And what it does show, of course, is the place we see the opportunity for this project in our own portfolio. We operate 7 out of the 9 offshore wind farms currently operational in the Irish Sea. We operate those from our bases in Barrow and from Birkenhead, and we've had a very successful campaign of repair and upgrade on the Walney offshore wind farm, which has been operating from Douglas all this year. So it's been a fantastic opportunity to test the facilities and test the ability to operate offshore wind from here in the island. To give a bit of context to this, and I appreciate energy policy can sometimes seem something that's been in the works for a long time, and I think this actually reflects that quite well. But in terms of the journey that offshore wind has been on, you have to in fact go back now over a decade for the first intentions of the Isle of Man government to develop the opportunity, and particularly the economic opportunity there is in offshore wind farm development in our national waters. So the recommendation from the Council of Ministers there was to explore opportunities to develop offshore energy production, including the establishment of strategic partnerships. And that was the Council of Ministers back in 2013. And that really gives context to why it's the case I'm here today and why how Orsted sees this playing out, that we do see this as a strategic partnership for the Isle of Man to seize the opportunity of the natural resources in the wind and to seize the economic benefit from the territorial waters. The following year was the subsequent Tynwald support, that the development of offshore wind and marine renewables. Most importantly there, that the electricity produced would be initially exported to neighbouring jurisdictions. And one of the things that we've been working really hard on over the last couple of years with Manx Utilities is the additional work involved in bringing a direct link for power from the wind farm to the Manx grid. And that's something that we're continuing to work with. We had some important feedback on that through the consultation, and it's something I'll come on to in a second around the feedback we received. And lastly, and I guess the most recent update, is the energy strategy from the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture in 2023. It's something that I know is currently under review and for update to Tynwald later on this year. But the phrasing there is very clear that there is an obvious understanding of the opportunity that offshore wind can bring, both from a revenue stream point of view, from the original economic opportunity, which was identified back in 2013. But importantly, this gives the commitment of the government to work as a high priority with Orsted on the existing agreement that's in place, and to hopefully see the delivery of an offshore wind farm at the beginning of the next decade. Some just further context on how this operates. So we operate within the planning regime that was established under the Marine Infrastructure Management Act in 2016. That was legislation that was introduced to govern all future developments within the territorial waters. And this allows for an application to be made directly to central government, to Isle of Man government. The establishment of an examining body, which would be a panel of 1, 3, or 5 inspectors. And they would be appointed to effectively examine the application and make a recommendation report on whether consent should be given for it, whether it should be refused, or whether it should be given subject to conditions. The planning permission itself would take the form of a marine infrastructure consent, and that would be a decision by the Council of Ministers. This is a totally separate document from our agreement for lease. In effect, that is our property rights over the seabed, and that's the agreement we were granted in 2015. and that contains all of the relevant details around the rental payments, around the usual landlord and tenant covenants you might expect in a tenancy. So, for example, it covers safe operation and future operation, as well as obliging us to decommission the offshore wind farm at the end of its 35-year lifetime. It also contains an opportunity to renew it should it continue to be successful after that date. So some more context on really what is the opportunity. As I mentioned, in 2014, the government identified this area for lease shown on this diagram in purple. You can see in the diagram the existing offshore wind farms in the Irish Sea shaded in grey, and the future planned offshore wind farms in UK waters shown there in red. Most important, I think this demonstrates the location of future plans for UK offshore wind. In English waters, you'll notice the projects coming right up to the Manx territorial limit of 12 nautical miles, 22 kilometres, in particular the Morgan project there. Our agreement for lease was awarded in 2015 and gave us the rights to carry out the surveys and all of the exploratory work which we have been conducting over the past 4 or 5 years. The tenant is an Isle of Man company. We operate and manage the company from here in the Isle of Man in our office in Douglas. But our agreement for lease is guaranteed fully by our parent company in Denmark, that is Orsted Wind Power AS. And for those who are not aware, Orsted Wind Power AS is one of the world's largest developers and operators, and is also 51% state-owned by the state of Denmark. The project itself would be a 4.4 billion capital investment, and that would be an entirely privately funded investment. So I cannot be clearer that we have not sought, nor have we received, any direct investment or subsidy from the Isle of Man government. This is purely a private development facilitated as an opportunity for revenue to the Treasury here in the Isle of Man. And that would be secured through the annual rent in our lease when it is granted. So for the 35-year lifetime, the rent would be calculated each year as a percentage of revenue generated from the sales of electricity. We're working on a few other things, and we mentioned those during consultation as well. So our Community Investment Fund for the Isle of Man, this is something that we have done on our projects across the British Isles for many years. What we have decided to do uniquely for the Isle of Man is to broaden it from just charitable causes, but seek to look at all opportunities to invest directly in the community across the island. We've also made the promise that we will fund that to the tune of 1.5 million every year, and that is substantially more than we have funded on community benefit projects in other projects. And the real context to that is, of course, our understanding that this is the island's first offshore wind farm, and in that context, it's going to have a major impact in terms of its location, its visibility, and we want to do as much as we can to spread the benefit of having offshore wind directly with our communities right across the island. We're, as I mentioned as well at the bottom there, we're continuing to work with Manx Utilities on the options for power to the island. That's a lot of technical work. It's sometimes overlooked the amount of technical feasibility and studies that are required to understand how the grid here in the Isle of Man could adapt to new intermittent power sources, and how we can make sure that we have solutions for energy storage at times when the wind is at full pelt, but the demand may not be there right at that moment on the grid. So that's something we're continuing to do. A quick summary really here. I might not read through all of these. This is our approach to assessing environmental impacts, which are so important. The key thing really is that we are, of course, a project which must conduct an environmental impact assessment. The critical part of that is not only assessing what our impact is, but at the early stage, assessing what the baseline information is out there. So we have been conducting surveys now for over 4 years. I think we have spent almost £5 million on our survey campaigns for geophysical state, looking at benthic grab surveys, bird and marine mammal surveys. We've just removed our wave measurement buoy successfully last month, which has been getting important data for the design of the wind farm. And the real critical thing is it's for our experts in the field working with stakeholders across the island, some of whom are here, and I want to extend my thanks for all the hard work and many meetings that we've called you to in the last few years. But we reach out to as many organisations who, of course, have far more detailed information and far more insights on day-to-day activities in this particular part of the territorial sea. And really, it's for us to then make the commitments and make the mitigation measures that we have to ensure that we minimize as far as is possible the impact that the project will have on our environment. A second really important one I wanted to highlight is, of course, our assessment of the visual impact. So we have, during our consultation period, over the summer, provided visualizations, which will remain on our website in our document library, which we are keeping up and online, of course, showing the maximum design scenario of the wind farm. And I think it's really important for me to reiterate what we have to show from an environmental point of view. So the visualizations of the offshore wind farm which are presented show the largest number of turbines in the largest possible space with the maximum impact, i.e. a close edge to shore maximum impact. That is the maximum design scenario. What we will do now is take the feedback on that scenario and refine, review, and adapt our plans accordingly. Because we accept that we have to show from an environmental impact point of view the worst case. It's a phrase that my colleagues don't let me use, but it's the reality of what we present. And we work then within that envelope. And when it comes to applying for planning permission as well, we will seek a envelope within which to build the project, which will be the maximum parameters. It will be somewhere within that particular context. So coming on to a brief summary, we are, of course, as you might imagine, having closed the consultation on the 11th of September. We are doing a huge amount of work as we speak, analysing the information and making sure that we get all of the feedback captured and ready for our review of the plans and also for reporting in our consultation report, which would come out next spring. But in summary, this is how we approach the consultation itself. So obviously issuing out 43,000 12-page booklets was a huge ask for the team. I think our previous record in Orsted was 7,000 on any project. But again, it reflects how important we see engaging with the whole island community as a nation. We had our events, which were extremely successful in 5 locations across the island during July and August, and our stand at the Royal Manx Agricultural Show as well, where we had the 360 visual headsets available. It was great to use a local supplier for these, so the animation of the offshore wind farm and the headsets themselves provided for us by a local company. And it was really important for us that we responded individually to all of the direct questions we received. So we had 54 direct questions by email, and every one of them, I'm pleased to say, received a direct response. If there are any fears in the audience you did not receive a response, please speak to me afterwards, because that was our intention. And I have a few reports of hitting junk email folders, but actually quite a lot of good engagement as well when it came to that. And believe me, none of the answers we gave were junk, so they don't deserve to be classed in such a way. One of the critical ones I'll just mention on that, I'm very proud of course, is the 73% of respondents who said they were happy with the quality of information. So even those who may have concerns or criticisms about the project and perhaps do not support it, the vast majority there were still pleased with what was presented and the quality of how we did that. So as quick a summary as we can on how the consultation was received and the project was received. In response to this question, which was based on our proposals, what is your opinion of the Mervannon offshore wind farm? We achieved 51% in support, 41% who do not support, and 8% who do not need need more information. Sorry. And again, most importantly, and I'd like to say thanks to all of those who took part. One of the most critical parts for us is making sure we have actual feedback we can use. So no matter whether people supported or did not support the proposals, having actual information about what it was of greatest concern means that we can properly refine these plans before we submit them. So you can see the summary there of the top 3 most important things. And as you might imagine, in our active planning now for what we will refine and redesign, our focus is 100% on the top 3 issues there from those who do not support. And of course, the ongoing work we're doing to bring the project forward is very much focused on the top 3 for those who are in support. So most of our refinements, if not all of them, will address, at the very least, all 3 of those bottom issues. So finally, really a quick walkthrough of next steps for us. As I say, we will collate all the information and feedback we've received into a consultation report, which will be submitted as part of the application, and of course, all of that is made public next year. Our proposals are being reviewed as we speak through the developable area approach, so refining the boundary, refining the design limits of the project. And our current intention is we will submit the planning application in Q1 next year. This would, under the Marine Infrastructure Management Act, mean that we have the public hearings held during the late part of summer and into autumn next year. And according to the Act, the Council of Ministers will receive their report and should decide by Q2 26. A lot of other work still going on, of course, with stakeholders across the island and beyond. Continuing survey work for the transmission cable to the UK market, and of course working hard on the Power to Island link. There's still a lot of work to go in terms of regulatory frameworks, so there will be still continued action in terms of legislative requirements through Tynwald in the coming 12 and 18 months around electricity generation, regulation and health and safety, and our continued work with the Isle of Man government on making the case with the UK government for the support through contract for difference in the Crown dependencies and that opportunity to export to the GB electricity market, get the revenue back to the Treasury here and seize that economic opportunity, and then effectively support the ambitious targets there are in the UK for development of offshore wind. So there's a lot more to do, and I think I acknowledge we're doing a lot, but we need to ask a lot more of our colleagues and stakeholders who've been helping us on this journey. So a huge thank you is my key message. A lot of people have said to me in feedback, particularly those who support, why don't you just get on with it? I was reflecting this morning, this is what just getting on with it looks like in offshore wind terms. These projects take 7 to 9 years to get from development to operation. So we are going at a fantastic pace, given the commitments that Tynwald and Council of Ministers made many, many years ago. But we are confident we can deliver something in partnership with Isle of Man government in the coming years. So thank you very much.
John Galloway, thank you very, very much indeed. Yeah, we'll open it up to the floor for a quarter of an hour or so. Thank you for that informative presentation. Let me begin by asking you what I think a lot of people in the room will probably be thinking, because Orsted and Kroger have both got options for lease on the seabed, if you like, on the same area. How can both projects go ahead?
Both projects can go ahead on the basis of more certainty and around both plans. So we work with oil and gas companies on coexistence right across the world. We do offshore wind more than anyone, as I explained. And we constantly reach agreement on how these things are possible. It's been unfortunate that things have taken as long as they have, because the one thing we need is certainty for our plans. As I've mentioned, we're spending millions on surveys and millions on progressing our proposals. So the sooner we know, the sooner we can engage and come to hopefully some form of agreement that makes it possible. But I think we're definitely, with our planning application being prepared now for next year, perhaps coming to a pinch point that we need to know more, and we need to come round the table with them.
Okay, how might this impact then on Kroger, potentially?
It's really difficult to know, because they don't know themselves what their plans are, and I don't mean that in a critical way at all. They've been very open about that. They want to do things in a certain order, different from their original license, and that's the application they've got in at the moment. So it's probably more important that they have an answer on that before they can explain to the likes of us what their development in the future could look like, be that the use of the seabed, or access or future infrastructure within the area. It's a definite overlap. There is no getting away from the fact that we share the same space, but we can only reach agreement when we know exactly what we're reaching agreement about.
Are there any other projects planned in Manx Waters that you're aware of?
There are discussions all the time about plans, but it's a bit plans and damned plans, you might say. I mean, I'm pleased to say certainly within the area we are talking about, we probably have more understanding of that area of seabed than anyone has had for many years, given the amount of surveys and the amount of discussions we have. The real way I frame it is that we have to engage with all users of the marine space in the same way. So I treat Kroger in that sense the same way. Our engagement has been fantastic with the likes of Steam Packet and Mesron and Stena Line for the Belfast routes. We've had fantastic engagement with Manx Fish Producers Organisation. The list is on and on, so I didn't put the whole list on the PowerPoint, but it's important that we understand what people want to do with the area of seabed that's there, and certainly what the Isle of Man government wants to do with the territorial sea, which is capture the natural resource of the wind and get some economic benefit, I think.
Pinch point then, Kroger, shipping routes, touched upon that. It'd be rude not to ask you your opinion on the island's UNESCO biosphere status, the Mervannon project, sustainable development goals. Where do you want to start?
Well, it was great to have the session yesterday. Well done to Minister Barber for presenting on the UNESCO biosphere status and goals that there are out there. I always reflect, of course, on goal number 7, because that is the clean and affordable energy goal. And there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that development of offshore wind and taking your natural resources, the fuel that's in the wind, and we have plenty of it in the island, there's no doubt. Being able to seize that is by far the cleanest, and through deployment of offshore wind, certainly at Orsted, we've proved one of the most affordable ways of generating electricity.
Mervannon?
In that context?
Same context?
I think we have to work really hard to make sure that we don't jeopardise the status when it comes to the periodic review, and that's something we know we're committed to. We're part of the partner network, and I think we've got to make sure that the information that we've gathered is agreed with all the parties involved, so that when we come to talking about leaving the space we enter in a better condition than we found it, that's our biodiversity ambition for all our projects, that we actually monitor what that means. So you'll see commitments when we make our application for planning next year around how we will continue to monitor the environment within the offshore wind farm area for the whole of its lifetime.
In terms of visual impact, that is always going to be, whether it's an onshore project or an offshore project, on an island this size, with this number of people, I would imagine that the visual impact is always going to be if not the number one issue that's raised. I know on one of your slides then it was, highly mentioned. How can you reassure people that the any visual impact will be outweighed by benefits?
Yeah, I mean, if the Isle of Man wants to have its first offshore wind farm, no matter where it was going to be, it was going to have a visual impact. We only have our territorial waters out to 12 nautical miles, and that's 22 kilometres. I had a question from a member of the public a couple of weeks ago about how close this project was to the shore and how did that compare to other projects in the British Isles. It prompted me to do the research to find out, and there are over 20 offshore wind farms in the British Isles that are closer to shore than Mervannon is at 11 kilometres. And I was particularly, I believe me, and this is me being perhaps a bit too candid, but topics as Deborah presented on fantastic presentation, as I say, nearly with tears streaming down my face for her video. I reflect on those things more often than people might think. So when I think of the impact on tourism or visitors that having something as visual as Mervannon could be, I also then look at other parts of the British Isles where offshore wind farms have been operational for many years and they have not seen that type of impact, whether it's off the coast of Brighton, it's off the Essex coast, it's off the North Wales coast. They happen to all be projects that are closer to shore than this project will be.
Let me, some quick fire questions at you that have come in on Slido. If we will have an offshore wind farm supplying power, why would we also need a land-based wind farm? That won't be the first time you've been asked that.
It comes up more often than you'd even think, James, that question. I can only say what is in the energy strategy. So what the Isle of Man government set out in the energy strategy is to progress with offshore wind at great pace, and we've seen it become part of the strategic objectives in the island plan. The next column in the energy strategy is near-term solutions, and that includes onshore generation in public ownership. So that is the strategy. I'm not going to debate the policy that's been set for them to deliver that.
No, we haven't time. What does the wind farm mean to Joe Public in terms of pricing? You alluded to that briefly in your presentation.
It's really tricky because it's a percentage of revenue, and so that is something that varies throughout the lifetime of the wind farm. It's also something, and I know this question's come up through consultation, that we have, and the DOI have said, is commercially sensitive. And I just want to give a bit of context. I know this is quick-fire questions, so I'm not doing very well at this. But I do want to give context to this because it's really important. The reason that's commercially sensitive is really twofold. First of all, it is a property agreement between a landlord and a tenant, the DOI being the landlord, and us as a private business being the tenant. And that, revealing the details of all of that agreement would be quite a precedent to set, just in that context of future property transactions. And in the context of future property transactions there may be in the territorial seas. So that's why I think, and I can't speak for them, but I think that's possibly one of the reasons the DOI do. If I just say the second reason, and I mentioned this, the contract for difference auctions in the UK, that's how that system's run for power. That's a competitive auction in a number of years' time. And so it would be a sensitive issue for us to talk about the revenue to the island that we might pay on the basis of future energy prices that we will have to bid for in only a few years' time.
Again, a question you'll have been asked, I'm sure. Effectively, are your blades environmentally safe? There have been some reports, Richard says, of the environmental dangers of minute particles being dispersed from falling blades on wind farms. They're likely to end up in the food chain. So are they environmentally safe? Is the proof of that?
Yes, we have the proof of that. Our blades, certainly we have used, are BPA safe. And we are working really hard right now on the options for recyclable blades. So we've made a commitment at Orsted for all future projects, I think since 2019. That we would never send a blade to landfill at the end of its life. We have decommissioned one offshore wind farm in Denmark, the first one, and 99% of all materials we used were recycled or reused from that decommissioning. So I do think that the sustainability around this is an end-to-end thing that we are committed to delivering.
If the wind farm was finished now, another attendee says, would we be able to utilise the power it generates with our current infrastructure? And if not, what would be the estimated cost of upgrading that network effectively?
So that is exactly what the engineers are working on at Orsted and working with Manx Utilities on trying to study. The good news is at the levels of demand there are in the island, it's not foreseeable you would have to upgrade the grid infrastructure itself. So when we talk about in the UK these overhead line projects, National Grid's reinforcement projects to build a backbone to the grid because of all the offshore wind that's coming, we don't see that as a likely outcome in the island at all. There are other solutions to that, be that micro storage or energy storage around the island. And certainly if it was up and running right now, that wouldn't be an issue. It would be a usable source at the levels of demand on average we see in the island.
I've got 3 questions left. I've got 3 minutes left, so 60 seconds. Typically, wind farms pay up to 5,000 per megawatt. Given your stated 1.4 gigawatt, that equates to 7 million, this listener's suggesting. Paying 1.5 is cheap.
So can you say that again,
Paying
sorry?
1.5. Typically, wind farmers pay up to 5,000 per megawatt. And they say, given your stated 1.4 gigawatts, that equates to 7 million. So they're suggesting that's quite cheap.
I might take that question away because it seems to be a lot of information. I don't know where it may have come from.
We'll keep that there because I'm not sure if there's something missing.
Do ask me afterwards if you want.
Yeah, I haven't got a name, sorry. Would Orsted go ahead if they don't receive the contracts for difference?
It's very tricky to make that case in the current climate because, for context, what contracts for difference do is give you the certainty to make such a huge capital investment up front. But I am never going to say never because there are many alternatives. So if I look at other countries around the world, for example, in the German market, that is not a market that is at the moment supported by the likes of a CFD. So it's not a no, but I think given the way that the UK market is running and has run, and we saw it through some of the auctions that people will have seen last year where no winners in the auction because there were no bidders in the auction. And of course, this year we were very lucky at Orsted to represent, I think, 70% of the total pot was awarded to Orsted projects in the CFD auction. So it's doable, but I think it would be difficult.
And final question, would Orsted support a guarantee that power, at least some of the power will be supplied to the Isle of Man and not just sold to the UK?
So I won't repeat the commercial discussions I'm having with Manx Utilities live on the stage. I don't think that's appropriate, but suffice to say that is very close to my offer to the Manx Utilities and to the Isle of Man government that we should be able to provide all of the island's needs from a link from the offshore wind farm to the grid.
3, 2, 1. That is the only time we've got one timed right all day and yesterday.
Thanks to you, James, not thanks to me.